between 8 and 10, as well as multiple conferences happening.
I am
And
going to start the live stream and the recording though.
excellent. Thank you, Deanna. Good morning, Enrico. Between 8 and 10, as well as good morning, Ellen. Enrico, we could probably give people just like 2 more minutes. I did hear from a couple of folks. PED is having a meeting at 9, so superintendent's not going to be here at least at the 9 o'clock hour until he finds out what's going on there. And then, good morning, Marjorie. We have a couple of folks that are out, and then just for everyone, Barbara is traveling and Peggy's doing double duty. So we appreciate people trying to juggle and make sure that you're also here with us. So we really appreciate that. We know this is a crazy time of year for anybody involved in education. I mean, not that every day isn't a crazy time of year in education anymore, but
You know what? There is never unbusy.
I know. Good morning, Counselor. Enrico, why don't we go ahead and get started? We cannot hear you if you're talking.
Good morning.
Good morning, Counselor. How are you today?
Good. How's everyone?
Doing well.
Good.
I think Enrico's jumping off and jumping back on. Good morning, Rodney.
Good morning.
Give Enrico a second to jump back in. Good morning. Where I just saw Yolanda. There we go. Like I saw her face pop up. Let's see. There he is. Jumping from Teams to Zoom sometimes messes with your sound. Anytime you're ready, Enrico.
I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble getting on. Can everyone hear me okay?
We can now.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My apologies. It's been kind of a odd morning with electronic media. Anyway, good morning, everyone. Welcome. Board members, counselors, commissioners. I want to get the meeting started and moving forward this morning. But before we start, I just wanted to make a couple announcements regarding some of the ABC staffing changes that we've had. So as you know, or you may know, we have 2 staff members that have kind of come into some new opportunities for us that we're very happy about. And the first one I want to announce, there he is. I want to announce that Jake Maribal, who's been with us actually since he was about 17 years old in different capacities with the county, has now been selected as a special projects coordinator. So Jake's, as I said, has been with us for quite some time. And he's taken advantage of every opportunity he's had at the county, both to advance himself professionally and academically. He's completed his bachelor's degree in sociology, and he's working on a dual master's degree at the School of Architecture and Planning with the Community Regional Planning Program. And it's a kind of a dual degree program, dual master's with public admin. So shout out to James. To Jake, thank you very much for being with us. I don't know if you could have found a better picture. That's a great likeness. The other thing I wanted to add is that Chloe Cawthorn, we'd like to welcome her also to the ABC team. She'll be beginning in the role of community program specialist on June 21st. So we're excited to have her as this former community school coordinator join the ABC team. And she'll be working directly with the community school and partnership development. So want to welcome Chloe as well. So two great additions, or kind of actually being able to move folks through our programming. So we really like to see that, both in ABC and just in the county in general. So with that, I think the next thing on the agenda is the Living Codebook Deep Dive presentation. So I'll hand that over.
So this has been my project for the last at least 2 years. This is something that we have been developing for a very long time. Ellen, I don't know if you wanted to give us some context and background for this. Thank you.
Thanks, Deanna. Happy to. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're doing well in our very hot June. So the code book is a really important tool, I guess I would call it, so that we can deepen our work in all of our community schools. One goal of the Codebook project was to measure robust implementation of what we think of as critical practices in 5 different community schools. We engaged UNM students to take a deep dive into the school's initial self-assessment and using artifacts and interviews to create their own assessment. And we've asked them to come and share their experience with us today. And I think it's going to be very interesting to hear about this. But one thing to note is these assessments are comparing the school to itself, but not comparing a school to another school, because each of our community schools are unique, and we want to make sure that we're not trying to standardize them. So that said, back to you, Deanna.
Great. Thank you so much for that context. And we appreciate the work of the Robust Implementation and Collaborative Leadership Team, which is also co-chaired by Board Member Barbara Peterson and Board Member Marjorie Krebs. So thank you so much for your input and all your assistance and support as we have tried to go through multiple iterations of this project. We may have a name for the code book now. We're temporarily calling it the ABC Community School Assessment Project, a quality implementation measure. We'll see if that sticks. It's a mouthful. But so I'm going to sort of give some background and context. I also want to recognize that many of the community school coordinators who participated in this project are here on in the meeting with us today. So ABC has, ever since Halsey was the executive director, we have really tried to implement results-based accountability as the way that we measure outcomes and progress. And so the questions that we look at there's 3. So how much did we do, which is really just measuring like how many kids participated in after school, or how many meals were handed out, or things like that. It's participation, it's numbers. And those are really great and fun things to look at and important. But we also really want to look at, and what we started moving towards with our committee, the Robust Implementation and other committees in ABC, is the implementation of the community school framework, which has 10 standards. It has 4 pillars. There's framework and a lot of research that has been done nationally around what it looks like to implement a community school. And so what we wanted to do with this particular project was measure implementation of the strategy, not necessarily looking at how much are we doing, because we're already measuring that, but how well are we doing it? We don't yet measure the third question, is anyone better off? But we're moving in that direction. That's kind of our next steps, next goals, is trying to figure out if we do a lot of things and we do them really well, what we should see are some results, right? So we should see some academic improvements, we should see some community improvement, we should see whatever goals that we have set should be shifting in community schools. So that's kind of the theory behind why we took this project on. So we created variables to measure implementation. That's one of the goals, right? We also want to drive continuous improvement. We are always about continuously improving what we do in education in that educational setting. And then we engaged the students from UNM to help us study the effectiveness of our tool. We asked them for feedback. We asked them to assess it. We also asked the community school coordinators who participated in it to give us their feedback, and the principals as well who participated, and the community school councils. So we had originally done a beta test, I guess like maybe 2 years ago, with 3 schools. We started with Garfield Middle School, Highland High School, and Pajarito Elementary School. So we wanted diverse representation from different parts of the city. We wanted diverse grade levels. So we have a middle school, a high school, and an elementary school. We wanted to really look at, we wanted to expand. So we chose those 3, and then we wanted to expand into looking at schools that were funded in different ways. So schools that had state grants, schools that were funded by ABC, schools that had other funding. And we wanted also a mix of experienced coordinators and new community school coordinators to just really sort of give us a broad representation of the community schools that are out there. So that's really how the schools were chosen to be part of this deep dive, is what we're calling it. And then, as I said, we had a contract in place with the UNM College of Population Health. And so we have, and unfortunately so because school's out, the students have jobs now and have moved away. And so they're actually not able to join us this morning. We tried really hard to get them here, but it just didn't work out, unfortunately. But they did a lot of work for us. And then we also were very lucky to have our wonderful intern, Alex Shoemaker, who is an intern for ABC, but also just completed her master's degree in public policy. And so she really kind of headed up this project, which has been fantastic. And I'm going to let her pretty much take it over here in a second. Those are the folks that really worked hard for this last semester on kind of really digging into what happened in these. It ended up being 5 schools. We originally had a few more selected, but some of them weren't able to participate for a few different reasons. So we had 5 schools where we did a deep dive, and we're going to share with you some of those results. So Alex, I think, why don't you go ahead and take it from here and talk about how we did things, and I'll move slides along as I can.
Certainly. So hi, I'm Deanna just introduced me. I'm Alex Shoemaker. I did a lot of work on this project during my graduating semester at UNM. It's still very fresh in my mind. So this really consisted of 3 major parts. We had a spreadsheet in Google Sheets, and it was full of math and formulas. It was tied to the fall 2021 self-assessments, which you can see. This spreadsheet screenshot is exactly what it looks like. The column first variable score 1 through 4 is from the fall 2021 self-assessment with there's a rubric that we graded on, 1 being the lowest and 4 being the highest. Self-assessment, very self-explanatory. What coordinators and their councils and their principals felt that their schools fell on the rubric, whereas the second variable score represented the deep dive. What I, Yamilet, or Honesty felt actually occurred based on looking at the artifacts and one-on-one interviews with coordinators and, if possible, counselors and principals, but I think we, for the most part, only met with coordinators. So in addition to creating the second variable score, we also had a narrative that explained why we felt that way. So basing our score on the rubric, You can see what I wrote here. This was for collaborative leadership. I took care of that pillar for all the schools in the program. And so I wrote these narratives. So for CLP practice too, I said that this school, their council has a plan that outlines goals for the year and aligns them with partner participation. That links to a document that that coordinator provided to us. So if you wanted to click through it, you could see where I came to that conclusion. And so that was one of our big focuses on this, transparency, making sure that, it's not a biased assessment. We want it to be accurate, as accurate as possible. And again, that came from artifacts provided. So council plans, council meeting notes and agendas. I even used some Jamboards, anything that coordinators had that they felt represented what was being asked of them in the rubric. And then
I wanted to say some of this is going to be very technical, and so sort of apologies in advance for that. It's a lot to take in. It was a very complicated project, as you can imagine. There are 97 different
Almost 100.
variables like this, where so they went through every single one of these and identified artifacts with the community school coordinators for 5 schools. So this was, as you can see, the scope of the project was quite large, but these are direct live links to those artifacts. So the community school coordinators worked really well with these UNM students in showing, yes, here is why I score. And you can, the other thing I wanted to point out, Alex, is that in this particular case, the scores matched exactly. So
yes.
The school said, we think we're at a 4 in this particular development. And then Alex, in her deep dive into their artifacts and evidence, was like, yep, I agree, you are at a 4, and here's how we know that. So when we're looking at how do we know that if implementation is happening, this is how we know, because we really looked at and dug into exactly what the schools were doing.
And another thing I'd like to add about that, if for whatever reason one of us found that the deep dive score was lower or higher than what the school assessed themselves at, rather than assigning them the new score that we give them, the Google Sheet was programmed to average the 2 scores.
Right.
So if they went from a 1 to a 4, they didn't get a 4, they got a 2.5, or they got a 2. It's too early in the morning for math, but I think you get the gist.
There was a lot of math involved. Then each
Yes.
of these scores was put into a graph. And then Alex made some beautiful, beautiful posters that we're going to show you. But before I do that, I wanted to know if there were any questions or comments, because as I said, I know this is a lot to sort of wrap your head around this early in the morning. Okay, Alex, I'm going to move on to she made these lovely posters.
Thank you. So before we actually dive into the posters themselves, I made the slide to describe the layout and how they can be read. So at the very top, it has the title, the school name. There's a paragraph explaining what the deep dive did. And in the PDF version of the poster, not here, you can actually click in that paragraph and it takes you to the Google Sheet so you can see the data for yourself. We start out by seeing the overall implementation score, which takes all 4 pillars and calculates the score. I can't remember the math off the top of my head, but I'm sure I could find it if anyone was curious. And that again is from the self-assessment in the fall to the external evaluation, or the deep dive. And then we have the school banner at the bottom. The collaborative leadership pillar is measured separately from the program and service pillars. That's because in national research, as well as our best practices, we've found that collaborative leadership drives the effectiveness of the program and service pillars. It's weighted more heavily. Out of the 4 pillars, collaborative leadership accounts for 50% of the score. So in theory, if collaborative leadership scores very high, we'd expect to see the program and service pillars score rather high as well. And so to differentiate between the 2 scores, I made, it's a little hard to see on this one. I made the self-assessment a lighter blue and the external evaluation a darker blue, kind of keeping in the deep dive underwater theme. I thought it was clever. And so with the bottom, there's the program and service pillars, which I've mentioned: expanded enriched learning time and opportunities, integrated student supports, and active family and community engagement. Those each account for about 17%. If you were to divide the 4 pillars with one at 50%, the other 3 are about 17.5 or so. And so those are measured out of 17 points, and collaborative leadership is measured out of 50 points. Okay, so the first school that we worked with in the deep dive was Garfield Middle School. And their poster was just on the previous slide, but here it is again. The numbers are rather small. I'm going to try to pull them up on my own screen so I can tell them to you. So their overall implementation score dropped very slightly. I think often we found that there was higher scores that we ended up dropping just slightly. And so that tends to be, or that has appeared to be a trend in this project. The collaborative leadership score was slightly lower than the self-assessment. And then the program and service pillars were either slightly lower or just the same. And yes. Ellen.
So we're comparing a school to itself,
Yes.
and Garfield has changed leaders.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about the impact of, like, I think they've had 3 principals in 3 years or something like that. I mean, talk a little bit about the implications of those changes in what you're trying to measure.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate you bringing that up, Ellen, because that's a really important aspect of, again, how collaborative leadership can drive the program and service pillars. If there's a change in leadership with a principal or a coordinator or both, that can actually change community school practices within the school. Depending on how much the principal or new coordinator knows about community school practices, best practices, and national research. And some principals have different leadership styles, do things differently. There's a matter of getting to know how the coordinator works or how the new principal works. So trying to mesh those together and establish a new baseline can actually drop the score a little bit, because there's the learning curve essentially. So this, the deep dive here might actually account for that. Like you said, if they've changed principals 3 times in the last 3 years, I can't confirm that off the top of my head, but if that's true, I wouldn't be surprised given this score.
The community school coordinator for Garfield is here. Pam, I don't know if you're able to unmute and jump in, or if you're listening to, I know there are several meetings going on at once. So I did allow, if she has the ability to, maybe she can jump in, and maybe at some point I'll keep trying to communicate with her. But I think that's a really good question.
Can I add, one of the things that we are positing through this deep dive and we'll be looking at as we move forward with this project is the idea that schools are going to have transitions, particularly in leadership in our state. What we have seen across the state is through the Legislative Education Study Committee, they've looked at, like, an average principal will change every 3 years, or a school's average leadership will shift every 3 years, which obviously this strategy really is anchored in a leadership, collaborative, distributive leadership team. So we have to find ways to mitigate that, because it's going to happen no matter what. We know this. Teachers are the core. We have that's a whole other conversation, and how we really engage teachers in a much deeper way. But one of the things that we are looking at through this project is, if we do have these changes, the higher a school is on the scale, which really isn't about like good or bad, it's really about stages, right? So that high stage is driving transformation, meaning they have structures, practices, and people in place that are holding it together. when one of those moves, if we are in the driving transformation phase of the work, the idea is, yep, it may drop back down to learning the strategy because a new principal, first-year principal, has no idea what a community school strategy really is yet, is going to have to learn. There's going to be a learning curve. But if everything else is in place and holding steady, the movement back into driving transformation will be much faster than if they hadn't had all of these practices, best practices, structures, strategies in place. So we don't know that yet, but as we, but I think we're kind of seeing inklings of that in this first couple looks at, the looking at the schools in this way. But we think that's what's going to happen. So we're going to continue to look because it's critical, because it's not going to change, right? We're not going to stop principals from moving along. So I think Pam just put something in there. It says they do have a new principal. They've had 6 counselors and at least 5 assistant principals since we started this in the last few years. So, that's a lot when we're trying to change the way we deliver education, right? So I think it's a really, this is one of those maybe 3 steps away, the thing, from the code book itself and what we're looking at for really stabilizing the strategy. Ellen, sorry.
Well, I have watched key people move out of schools and then everything kind of falls apart. The idea that the community school strategy can anchor change is really exciting to me because I think that's essential. I really like the way you just framed that, Danette. Thank you very much. It inspired.
Barbara, I was gonna jump in, and then Danette said, "Oh, much more eloquently than I could." But I think, in terms of policy, how we ensure that principals that come into schools that are community schools understand the importance of that work and understand that their role in that school is going to be different. And so I think there are things from the sort of top down but I think, Danette, you said perfectly that it depends on the collaborative nature. And if it's really collaborative, it's going to be the stability. So then it really puts even more importance on the role of the council to bring people in to have that voice there, and for staff to really be integrated into how they relate to the community school and how they are a part of it, how they utilize what it means for their students.
Alex, I think we'll show you quickly the rest of the school posters.
Okay. All right. So the other schools that we've talked about in the deep dive is the next one is Pajarito Elementary School. Kind of a similar story with Garfield, slightly lower scores, but with active family and community engagement remaining unchanged. But again, these are not huge drops in scores. So I don't know personally if Pajarito has experienced any leadership changes or not, but okay. I see Ellen shaking her head. Again, kind of like what Barbara and Danette have said, it has to do with the council and the structures that the school has in place. Next up is Polk Middle School, which has a slightly different thing going on for them. They've actually experienced some increases, including in the overall implementation score, as well as their integrated student supports. The score for integrated student supports was actually much higher. And so I thought that was very interesting to see whether the school was, or the coordinator and council were rating themselves lower than they needed to, or I'm not sure what was going on, but it's good to see that increase. And then next was Lew Wallace Elementary School, which was kind of following the trend here with slightly lower scores. Their integrated student supports score ended up being quite a bit lower from the self-assessment score. Another interesting data point there for me. And then lastly was West Mesa High School. And for the majority of this, the scores remained unchanged between the deep dive and the self-assessment and the deep dive. There were some discrepancies in the pillar scores. If you were to look closely, for example, the integrated student supports self-assessment is 11.05, external evaluation is 11.04. That is negligible. That I can say with certainty that was actually a matter of rounding. And so those numbers are the same. And so that another really interesting thing, how that happened, I'm really interested to see, but and that's it.
This is Barbara. I've got a question about that. Do you think the lowering of scores is actually reflective of a deepening of their understanding of the work? And I say that just because I know as a teacher, sometimes I think, oh, I did that really well. And then as I became more experienced, I'd look back on things and go, oh, I really did not understand. And so I wonder if the lowering scores is actually a positive.
I really appreciate that you asked that, Barbara, because I think that is a possibility. You know, we said there's almost 100 of these variables, and it's not that these variables just come up in the self-assessment and the deep dive. They are active and come up some more often than others, but throughout the school year, they are part of the school's community school practices. And so I do think that it might be reflective of understanding just the sheer depth and importance of what's going on, and then realizing, oh, well, I think this is an area for growth.
And Jess Selby put a comment in the chat. And Jess, did you want to actually unmute and give us your comment?
I can do that real quick. Yeah, when our council was going through this, through the code book, we really were being realistic with where we really thought we were at and not necessarily where we wanted to be. And I think it was really easy for us to sometimes go, okay, this is where we were working toward and we can see that next step. But for our council, we're like, but where are we really now? And I think that really helped us to key in on exactly where we fit in that matrix.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important that you all did that, not to say that it wasn't the case for anyone else, but just in general, being open with yourself and your councils as to where your school is exactly is the best way for identifying these growth areas or where are your strengths.
I do want to thank you so much, Alex. Before we get into more questions, I just wanted to recognize a couple things. First of all, I'd like to recognize Commissioner Piscotti, because had it not been for her and lending out her staff who had experience in designing something like this, we likely would have never gotten this off the ground. And I got to say, it's one of the things since I've been working with ABC and since before ABC was formerly ABC, that I think has the most relevant implications for really looking at the complexity that is a community school strategy that moves the needle from only looking at whether or not test scores improved, like our traditional education measures, but looking at a way that we can say, if we're doing this really well, people will be better off. And that better off measure may look different in every single school based on what that community school council wants to focus on, or that school team wants to focus on. And this allows us to say with some consistency across the network that this is how we can measure a piece of this, and then each school can be different, but there is consistency with some of it. So I really thank you so much, Commissioner, for allowing us to get this off the ground. Are there any other questions before we move into our next segment? So then one last thing I'd like to say is this whole project has really large implications broadly. And part of our work, it has been, working with some folks outside of Bernalillo County to see if we can come to an agreement about how this rubric might apply to the whole state. I mean, really taking into account, because in Bernalillo County, we have rural schools, we have very urban schools, we have that diversity. So really trying to make sure that the things that we are saying should be the best practice in a community school are messaged in the correct way, the words are correct, the realistic expectation, depending on what the size of your school, the size of your community, et cetera. And for Bernalillo County, right, it might be like the South Valley has its own context, right? Or the Far West Mesa is its own context. So we've been doing that work, which we will update you all on, probably at the beginning of next school year as we're working towards that, also with the state of New Mexico. The other piece of this is that we are helping to define this for the state, right? Rather than traditional education measures being applied to a new way of doing business, if you will, a new way of delivering education. We are really working with our partners across the state to try and make that work for everyone. It'll probably look different, right? Because this is very ABC centric, right? And what we believe and how we want to see, how we believe community schools should be implemented. But I have to say, we are looking at probably upwards of 60 schools next year in the network, the ABC network. In 2018, we had 26 schools. In 2007, when we started this, we had about sort of 7 schools. And so for those of you who have been supporting this work, and some of you with different hats, right? I know that Yolanda was with OSA back then and helping the Elevate initiative. Chris Muir was doing the same thing. Those of you who are particularly board members and have been kind of working with us on this, I cannot say how appreciative I am of the fact that you allow the ABC team and the partners and your organizations to come together to develop something like this. I really believe this is going to have huge implications, not only for us, but across the state, to really help us guide the work, but also see where our investments should go, right? Like, we need to look at how we are investing our dollars, both locally across our agencies. Everybody's agency pretty much is putting some kind of money in somewhere to make this happen. So I just want to recognize that, the longevity of this board and the way that people connect to this board have really made this possible over time. And that growth pattern has also been a big challenge for not only ABC, but the district in itself, and really keeping up with principal training, having a pipeline of principals, as Ellen mentioned, that really even have a baseline understanding. And one of the things we are engaged in here as ABC is giving input to a principal micro-credential to help principals really have the opportunity to learn before they step in, and it's like trial by fire. So there are lots of things going on outside of just ABC that we hope will help ABC as well. So thank you so much, everyone, for everything that you've done to get us here to this point. Any other questions or comments? Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Enrico, if you're good, I can just move on into the next section if you are okay with that.
I'm okay with it. Move into the Bread Club.
Right. So also exciting, we went a lot of people went to the National Community School and Family Engagement Conference last week. And these are just some highlights. We had a number of folks from Albuquerque present. We had Deanna and Serge Martinez from the law school presented on Two Sides to Every Story, a community partner's perspective, which was incredibly well received. It was at capacity, that over 60 people in their room. The first time they presented was like 3 conferences ago, and it was just focused on what had been happening with the Parent Preschool Co-op, where they had 15 people that showed up to hear them speak. And I don't know if you want to give any highlights, Deanna, of what the kind of feedback and the kind of conversation that took place in that session. That I heard great things about it every time I was walking down the halls from all kinds of people.
I think what was really interesting is people asked in the question portion, well, how do you make these partnerships work at a systems level? And I said, we have a board. And I explained who was on the board and how we wrote this resolution to make to really solidify the partnership and how the board works together. People were very, very, very interested in learning about the ABC board, actually, which was really not what I expected to talk about during part of our presentation. But it is a really critical component of how to really make these partnerships at the systems level sustainable. So that was great. And I just, those of you who have heard Professor Martinez, he's a great speaker. He's really engaging. And I think it was interesting for people to hear from someone who works really closely with multiple community schools and what the benefit was to them as the law school in working with community schools. And he actually said, and I had not heard him say this before, but he actually said that he's changed the way he practices law because of this partnership with ABC. So that was really cool and nice to hear. And it was a lot of fun. So.
We also had the care and feeding of community school coordinators that Deanna and Lindsay Wilwell from APS presented on. And just a side note, you have to apply to do this. And there were 3,500 people at this conference. And you have to apply to present. And we were selected for 2 with a thank you, but we have so much. We'd really like to have more of ABC's work or the Albuquerque work, because everyone is really, people are very impressed with, like Deanna said, the nature of the Joint Powers Agreement and what it has created is huge for people. But that also went very well. Also another one that was completely full. And I think, I don't know, Deanna, is there anything you want to share about that one?
I think they should have given us a bigger room. People clearly want to hear about how to support community school coordinators. Our presentation was at 10 and we got there at 9 o'clock to set up, and it was full by like 9:30. All the seats were we started early because they wouldn't let any more people in our room and everybody. So I think, and we probably had around 75 people, I think, in that room as well. So it was, as I said, very clearly needed, something that people were very interested in. And what we went through was kind of the first year. So Lindsay and I worked really, really closely this year in developing sort of a onboarding for the new community school coordinators. So there were 18 in our cohort this year, and we just walked them through exactly what we did, all the tools we developed, our Google site, and it did seem to be really well received. And we had some very sweet coordinators from our cohort who were coming to our event, our presentation to support us. So we were like, no, out you go. You already know everything that we're going to say. And we need other folks to hear this. So it was very nice of them, though, to want to support us. Although we did have Anne Marie Strangio, a principal here, in our presentation, and she sent me a comment about it that I can actually, I can read that to you if you want to hear the comment about our session. She said, she is the principal at Lew Wallace. I attended the session about the feeding and care of community school coordinators. And despite being a seasoned community school principal, I learned so much about the coordinator side of this work. I encountered my own knowledge holes about things I didn't even realize I didn't know. And I became painfully aware of how much I still have to learn about the structures of community schools. Deanna and Lindsay had their participants leaning forward and madly scribbling notes about how they can also step up the work of developing and supporting community school coordinators in a powerful and sustainable way, which is very nice of her. And Lindsay, I don't know if you want to add anything. Again, multiple meetings. That's why Anne Marie is not able to be here. But I also have a statement from Anne Marie about her presentation, or just about the conference in general. And I think this is a really, I don't know if she had been to other conferences before, but I remember, so I first attended one of these conferences in San Francisco in 2012. And for me, being in a room of people who like spoke, lived and breathed community schools the way I did, really gave me a lot of strength to kind of like keep going, because sometimes it's really difficult. And often, and at that point, we were so new here in Albuquerque, and I felt like nobody understood what I was trying to do. And to hear from like more seasoned people who were like, no, keep going, you're doing great, was really like, it really helped build my confidence and my, like, you know, just to keep going and sustaining the work. And I think I heard from several of our community school coordinators where this was their first time, the same story. That they felt like, oh my goodness, to be in a room full of other community school people, not just a room, I mean, a massive, massive, massive hall of 3,500 people. So Anne Marie says, I came back from the National Community Schools Conference with my soul on fire for moving forward with this work. Everything in my soul tells me that community schools are the only way forward for our schools, and the ever broadening scope of what we must address and how we must move forward in order to serve all of our students. Oh my goodness, sitting in spaces with people from all backgrounds, professions, demographics, but with community schools in common was absolutely transformational. Hearing voices clearly and strongly that are usually relegated to the fringes of status quo school improvement work, hearing these voices speak loudly and confidently and with absolute surety about the way forward bolstered my heart for the work as both a school leader and as a follower on this human journey. And she did give a presentation on her PhD project, which was on social justice in community schools. And hopefully we'll get her in to present about that once she's finished. And then she just also talked about the wonderful ability we had, which I'll click over here, to connect with, this is everybody from New Mexico.
Wow.
That attended. It's 150. I think we might have been the second or third largest attendance for states.
And I will say that, as Deanna mentioned, we have been going to these conferences for a very long time. And the most we have ever had from New Mexico was about 65 people. And that was when Jose leveraged every dime known to mankind to get people to Baltimore so that, or I think it was, it was maybe Cincinnati, Baltimore, I can't remember. But anyway, to get our conference here in 2016, like he showed up in mass so that they would vote for us. And prior to that and after, I think it had been very small groups, mostly from Albuquerque. There's about 6 different counties represented in that picture. So it was really exciting to just see so many folks across our state doing this. And really, you know, ABC was the driver. We've had community schools for sure in New Mexico since the 1930s. But since 2007, when ABC was formed, we have never had a time when we didn't have a growth in community schools in our state. So it was really exciting. And I think one other thing that was really beautiful was, Deanna, if you want to go back to the award picture, last conference, they started these block parties and they give out awards, and people across the country nominate folks for the awards. And we had a number of people in New Mexico put in some nominations for Reina Luz Juarez to receive a Coordinator's Leadership Award. And it was really lovely to be able to honor her and the work that she's done, because Reina is one of those people that has been doing this work long before ABC was formed and in many iterations of community schools since she was a teenager. So that was really exciting as well. Any comments or questions about the conference? All right then. So,
So
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so we don't have any comments, questions on the conference. We do have a couple voting items on the agenda. But I'm not sure if everyone has had an opportunity to look at the minutes from the previous two meetings.
So Enrico, we do have one more,
Yeah, one more thing.
yeah, one more
Oh, the
announcement.
Harvard success. I'm sorry.
Yes, sorry about that. I'm gonna turn this over to Deanna because this is gonna be, now that she's, got the code book down, she's got a new passion project.
Now that I don't have school. In fact, my husband is like, you need some new projects. I don't like all this attention on me. He's like, let's find some projects for Deanna. So this is a really, really, really exciting one. We have been selected to be part of the Success Planning Community of Practice with the Harvard Graduate School of Education Redesign Lab. Only 25 people were invited to even apply, and then we were selected. So there's 10 in the whole country, communities. And we are partnering with Highland High School and Boys and Girls Club to do a pilot. And it just, the basic, what I really like about this project is it allows us to design it ourselves. And so it's really just basically looking at how can we support students through their educational journey, using community partners like Boys and Girls Club to really kind of dig into what students need and then help them get those supports that they need, which is what community schools do anyway. This is just a little bit more differentiated. So there's a team of 4 of us, including administration from Highland, Boys and Girls Club, and ABC, who will be going to Boston in next month for a 4-day or 3-day intensive training. And it is actually very community school focused because the person who just got put in charge of this, Tahida Jackson, she worked for Jose at IEL, and she's just taken on this project and just finished her master's at Harvard as well in education. So we're super excited about how this rolls out. We'll keep you updated as we move through the pilot, and hopefully this is something we can scale, not just in ABC and APS community schools, but throughout the state of New Mexico.
I just want to say this is exciting. That is like, that just kind of makes me all excited and giddy, because I know that in the project when we first started with community schools, and I'm speaking from the side of workforce development, we work specifically with Highland around the sort of that readiness piece and that planning, pathway planning with students. So it's exciting to see that something like that is going to actually take hold. So I know from the workforce side, we will be really interested in seeing how this plays out, because it has so many implications around that youth workforce development side. And, how do we start to embed that, and how can workforce be a partner with you as you're going through this design and through this pilot?
We are so happy to hear you say that, because I think we've even discussed that a little bit in this planning process. So thank you so much. Yeah, congrats to Deanna. I mean, these things pop up. I got to tell you, they come up with like, you have 4 days to turn in a proposal of how this might be. And, we juggle with like all these different partners. But because everyone is so connected to ABC through the board, it really makes it a lot easier for us to jump on these things. And so we're just really excited that all of this is starting to move in a place where people are asking us to participate, but I'm also very excited that I have the pleasure of working with a team of people that don't look at these types of opportunities and say, oh, that's ridiculous. That's only 3 days. There's no way. The entire team of the ABC staff is like, absolutely. We just, you don't get these opportunities every day. So do what you got to do to get it done. And it's a pleasure to work with people that is their first yes is in their heart always, even when it's killing us sometimes. I even sent an email to Deanna saying, stop writing things. We got too much now. And then right after that, another one came and she's like, I had this meeting with someone and now they want to be involved. I'm not even sure. So it's really exciting. And this, I think, is a great opportunity to really be intentional and lift up some really great work that's coming out of a community school and the way that the partnerships work together. So
and I know you and I have talked about that. It's that space of what's the high school space focused, right, or pathway or process with community schools. And it's like, it's more that intentionality with young people also being kind of the designers and the architects of what their pathway needs to be, but how do we engage that as part of a community schools initiative in a high school setting, which I'm so excited to hear this. Looking forward to hear more about it.
All right, Enrico, back to you.
Oh, well, thank you. Didn't mean to rush through this. I was just going to mention, we do have the two sets of minutes, and I don't know if anyone's had an opportunity to review them, or if so, we can move them forward. So if anyone wants to, we can make a motion to approve both the April and the May minutes, if everyone's comfortable with that. Do I have a motion from anyone?
So moved. This is Walt.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, moving on. We've got a little bit of an announcement. Danette, we're talking about having a retreat. And we were looking at dates for the retreat. It looked like September the 8th was a date that a lot of folks can collaborate on. And I wanted to put that up for discussion, if that is going to work for most folks. Danette, did you have anything else to add regarding that? It seems like that was kind of a good time, because school already, APS will already kind of got it started and gives us a chance to come together after all that craziness. And I don't know if we picked a location yet, but that's something that we can discuss once we select the time.
Yeah, I think there were a couple folks that September didn't work for, but there were more folks that August definitely didn't work for on that. So I know Marjorie is one that is going to be out of town on that date. I'm sorry about that, Marjorie. Definitely would love to have your voice at the table. And potentially, I don't know, if we work it through Alvarado Square, the training floor at Alvarado Square has a lot of technology that we could potentially, for anyone who's out of town, could potentially do maybe some hybrid, unless, Marjorie's going to be on a beach somewhere, and then we do not want to make her do a hybrid anything. But we could look at that if the day, if folks are willing. It is an all-day retreat or semi all-day retreat, where we would prefer people to be in person and really looking at, and really looking at what to set the path for next year. We tend to have a retreat every year. We haven't during COVID because 5 hours on Zoom was not really conducive to strategic planning or conversations that lead to like reviewing the strategic plan, those types of things. It is typically for those that are newer to ABC. We do have someone facilitate. It's generally Angelo Gonzalez, but given his role at PED, that probably will not be workable. But he did say that he would help with the planning, so that whoever we do decide on as facilitator has some history and knowledge about how the strategic plan was created, what's in it, where we're at with it, any critical issues. The other thing that I would like to do, if you all are willing to participate, is I would like to send something out, just sort of getting each of your individual feedback around kind of priority areas, like what you want to know, where you would like to explore things more, any hot button issues, so that we can really factor that in, knowing that we have a number of folks who are ABC board members the first time that are currently on the board, and really would like to start to look at that vision again. I mean, we've had, since our strategic plan, we have added almost 20 community schools, I think. So I think there's probably some things that people can look, may want to discuss that we don't get to in a board meeting that lasts an hour. So if there's no opposition in the next 3 weeks, we'll send out a Google form for people to sort of give us their individual feedback to help inform the agenda of that day.
So far, Danette, so it looks like the September 8th is kind of working. And, it'll give us plenty of time to prepare. I think we can do a really nice job housing that here at Alvarado, and taking advantage of a lot of the technology that was built into what the building was intended for, so. Okay, sounds good. Our next meeting is going to be August the 11th. And it'll be the same type of format. Does anyone have anything other to add to this before we end the meeting? Having heard none, we will conclude this meeting of the ABC board. Thank you all.